And welcome everybody to God's Views on Political News. It's so great to see you here today. We were having little technical issues, but we are here. How are you doing, Bill?
I'm doing okay, I guess. I'm just, you know, living the
Hanging
life,
in
I guess.
there? Well, have you been able to get any hand sanitizer in your state or anything else? I mean,
I am loath to give in to, the panic and the fear. But after a while, you do have to have toilet paper in the house. And,
yeah,
and so everyone else is, whoever got the whole toilet paper thing going. And, at a certain point, you have to respond to that. So to answer your question, my wife is very, very conscious of things like this, especially during flu season. She was sick at Hanukkah. So we've always had things like that around, thankfully. But the toilet paper, we're not accustomed to, just storing up rooms full of toilet paper, so that's become an interesting part of our life, going on the toilet paper search.
well, yeah, and apparently, in California, it's not just toilet paper, and it's probably the same way for you. I would think by now, hand sanitizer, toilet paper, Kleenex, on and on and on. You can't get anything.
Well,
So
we went grocery shopping the other day, and you cannot find a bottle of rubbing alcohol.
yes,
You can't find toilet paper, or if you find it, it's you're limited to how much you can buy. And then canned goods were being, starting to just kind of be wiped out, and just all kinds of things. So you can tell that people were starting to, oh,
freak.
well, I think there were people who freaked out early on, and I think
hmm
now what's happening is just people are forced to kind of respond to the freak out. Not that they're freaked out, but they're like,
Right.
these people are losing their minds and they're buying everything up, and I'm going to have to get some or there won't be anything, or they're thinking there won't be anything left.
Right.
There was a kid, I say a kid, there was a guy over here not too far from us in Hickson, which is just outside of Chattanooga. I think he had like 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer. I think he ended up giving it all away because the state attorney general was coming down on this back. But you've got things like that going on too. It's
He was
crazy.
charging up to $80 a bottle for those, and I think they made some money. It was two brothers in Tennessee, as a matter of fact, and
Yeah.
then he had to give. He donated 17,000, like you said, when they said you need to stop, you need to cease and desist what you're doing.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that people who aren't given to panic and fear and all those kinds of things are now having to respond to
Yes,
those who have given into panic and fear. That's the point I was trying to make. Because
it's absolutely true.
so anyway, it's it's interesting.
It is interesting. I want to say hello to some of the people coming in: Benita Hoover, Thomas Kincaid, Linda Norman, Carol Williams, Leanne Marie, Linda Norman, John Mott. Let's see, Robin is here today. Paul and Lori, Dee Lorraine, Shannon Lopez, Tom Wilkerson, Deidre. Just wanted to say thank you so much for being here and participating in our show every week. And I just wanted to say that we're glad to see you, and we're glad to see that you're healthy and everybody else is healthy, hopefully in your family. And Bill, that's one of the things. Do you think, when you're looking at all this, do you feel that there's anything underlying going on, or
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, all right. Let me start. Because Beth and I've been talking about this quite a bit, and particularly in terms of what do we tell people who are in the congregation? How should we really approach this? Because it's one thing if you're just having to think for you and your family. It's another thing if you're having to consider other families too. And by the way, I can't imagine the pressure that the president is under right now with all this kind of thing going on. Because every decision he makes, some people are going to love it, a lot of people are going to hate it. Anyway, so back to the point. Obviously people are getting sick. Obviously, there are people who are more susceptible, and so that's a fact. That's a reality, and so those are things that have to be considered. I do believe that the reaction to this is based on what we can see right now. There seems to be something else going on here. You know, again, and this may change as we go forward, you know, but again, there's still, what, in this flu season in the United States, something like 20-something thousand deaths from flu. All right, that's a lot of people, and
Right.
you know, hundreds of thousands, millions have been infected with the flu. It's a lot of people. You know, we've kind of come to the place, you know, we live with it. We live with the fact that, you know, flu season, people get sick, and unfortunately, sometimes people succumb to it because of other complications. So
Right.
I don't want to downplay what's going on now, but
Yeah, you're not
just
minimizing it.
right, but just based on what we're seeing, you know, we've had, I think I saw this morning, we've had something like 91 deaths in the United States, and there's something like 5,000 confirmed cases, and that's probably going to continue to go up as all this testing goes forward. All right, so said all that to say this. Something else seems to be in the works here. Something else seems to be going on. And I am convinced that there are people who would and may and probably are to some degree wicked people in high places that are going to exploit this. Now, I'm not saying that they initiated this. I'm not saying that they, you know, released something into the public. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that some, you know, never let a crisis go to waste is what Rahm Emanuel said a few years back. And I believe that there are people who are using this kind of as a dry run. Now, this is Bill's opinion, and maybe I've got my tinfoil hat on right now, but there are people who will use this as a dry run to see how far can we push people if we, you know, if we cause them to fear, if we push the panic button, if we get them afraid for their lives, and, you know, thinking that they're going to die, their children are going to die, what have you. How far can we push them into the corner to give up this, that, and the other? And it seems to me that there are a lot of people in this country who are willingly obliging those people who are doing that. Case in point, you know, New York City, the mayor shuts down all the restaurants, all the bars, this, that, and the other. Okay, on one hand, I understand that if we minimize the contact that we have with people, that, you know, reduces the chances of people getting sick. But I also see then that there's this attempt to overstep your authority and to push people, because that's going to put a lot of people out of work. It's going to put a lot of people out of business, you know. And so then what's really behind all that if you're not doing that during flu season? That's the point I was wanting to make here.
Well, and somebody this morning, I was talking to them, and I think already 8,200 people have already died of the flu since January. And we have had about 89 people that have died of, you know, coronavirus in a few weeks. So, I mean, and people always get really upset when I talk about the two, and they say, well, it's not the flu. I know it's not the flu. But what I'm saying is we have far more that are dying each and every day from something else. We're not even talking about that. And yet and it is different, and we shouldn't take it lightly. And we've seen what happened to China. You have to wonder if a lot of what happened in China was because of the fact that they threw so many people in together, so many people in the hospitals. So they have so many more people than we do.
Yeah.
They had people out on the streets all the time, you know, but everybody was crowded together at all times. This is, you know, it is different here. And then people say, but what about Italy? Well, in Italy, 100,000 Chinese from, you know, Wuhan came there. They were allowed to come to Italy and sort of, you know, live there, repatriate there, and they bought property there. So you had a lot of people going in and out of Italy to Wuhan, China, you know. So
Well,
you have an even different thing there.
same thing in Seattle, you know,
Yes.
where most, I think almost half of the deaths in the U.S. have occurred in and around, in Washington State for certain, but in and around the Seattle area. And, you know, there's a large Chinese population there. I've spoken there, you know, I've spoken to some of those people from China. So, you know, there is that, you know, back and forth there. So Yeah, it's not the flu. It has different, certain, similarities, but it has some distinctions as well. It's not the flu. It's quote unquote new, and people are just responding to it. And I realize that when something kind of upsets our little apple cart, things that we're accustomed to, and we don't like change, and things like that happen.
Right.
I get all of that, but my point was that I do believe that there are people who will exploit this to kind of advance an agenda. And that makes me wonder, and I'll put it that way. It makes me wonder if this isn't, in some people's minds anyway, a dry run for things that they would like to do, later. And I want to say one other thing here before I forget to do it. There are instances where the powers have already been given to certain mayors in certain cities. New Orleans is one of them, where that in this emergency situation, they can forbid the sale of firearms, ammunition, and those kinds of things. Okay, so what does that got to do with anything? What does that got to do with getting a virus and getting sick and, et cetera? So those are the kinds of things that scared people scare me worse than the virus does. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I think that was the Illinois mayor, and I can tell you what it has to do with it is that they can say, and they can make a great argument for that. Well, we're afraid that people are, we're watching all this stuff and people trying to hoard toilet paper and fighting each other in Costco and people stabbing each other and all that. So we got to take the guns away from everybody. We got to limit that because we're afraid for the public safety. And let me just tell you something. That argument can have guns taken away from you like that. And I know people say, well, that's Second Amendment. Yes, but they'll say that the public good outweighs, their harm, their safety outweighs the Second Amendment. And the burden is not as great on the Second Amendment. And it's only temporary.
Well, right.
Yeah. And I have some swampland in Florida to sell you to build a nice house on.
Right. Well, and so, I'm not, and I'm not trying to push the panic button here either.
Right.
I'm just saying that this, some of the things that are coming out of this do disturb me. They do disturb me. And so let's go down this road for just a moment. Is God allowing this as kind of a dry run? Number one, to see, what's in my heart. Am I full of fear? Am I full of panic? Am I trusting in the government? Am I relying on the government to fix this and to give me all the answers? If that is you, then you're in a world of hurt. If you're dependent on the government. I mean, we shouldn't depend on the government for anything. Now, let me just make this statement. The government should, if they've allowed, contagious diseases to come in because we have this open border policy, or there are those who push for an open border policy, then yeah, that's on them. But as far as me depending on the government to fix this, get a vaccine in place, make sure all this, that, and the other, and to tell me how to live my life and tell me what to do, man, if that's your mentality, you're in trouble. And government's always going to be willing to tell you what you want, what you need to do, what you don't need to do. So it's, again, I'm not trying to push the panic button, but I just kind of see what's going on, a little bit here, a little bit there, and over here. And imagine right now, this situation that we're currently in, imagine if Hillary Clinton was the president of the United States.
No, thank you.
Imagine if Joe Biden was the president.
That is a pandemic.
Right now, then I'd be hitting the panic button. Imagine what if Bernie was, what I'm saying? So thank God somebody who at least seems to be on our side right now is in that situation, holding back what could be a dam break. But this is what's bothering me about it the worst. So back to the point I was going to try to make. Maybe the Father is allowing these kinds of things to happen to show you and me what's in our heart, but also to consider looking ahead into the future, because this will happen again.
Yeah.
It will happen again, and it may be something even bigger next time. It might be something that really is life-threatening to the degree that people want us to think this is. How much do you rely on the government right now? How much do you rely on the grocery stores right now? How much do you rely on this, that, and the other right now? And so, the wisdom of our grandparents is being highlighted in all this, as far as I'm concerned, and putting our trust in eternal things. You know, that's kind of what's coming to me right now, and kind of refocusing and repositioning, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and Benita said, what will the tribulation be like if this is a response to flu of any kind or even impending snowstorms, etc.? I think this is kind of setting the guidelines for, like Bill's saying, for the next one that's coming. And you will see that I've seen the aggression of people. I have seen that all in it for yourself of people. People were laughing at California because it kind of started out here first, but now it's not so funny. It's moved across the entire nation, where people are running down the aisles of Costco. People are hurting each other. People are spraying their children like with bleach. I think we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
To disinfect them. And again, there's one thing about taking precaution, and there's another quite a different thing about overreacting to the point where and maybe this has to be done. Maybe we have to close our government down and everything, for 15 days. But you look at this, I mean, we are closing the United States down.
Yeah, that that serves, I think that serves the purpose and agenda that some people have in this country.
I believe it too.
They will exploit that chaos, that
Yes.
and they would exploit that uncertainty. And when people don't know how they're going to pay their bills, and they don't know how they're going to feed their children, and this, that, and the other, and fear takes hold of them, and this desire for self-preservation supersedes everything, people do things. People do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. I think I mentioned this a week or two ago, but there's a biblical precedent for this, actually. And it's in the story of Joseph and the famine that gripped Egypt, and then it spread through the entire world. And you've got people coming to Egypt because they had stores there. They had people coming to Egypt that were selling first, they were giving all their money to Egypt. Then secondly, they were selling their livestock, and then they sold themselves. They sold themselves as servants unto Pharaoh in exchange for food. So people do things like that when, self-preservation, that need supersedes everything else, which, by the way, let me say that runs contrary to what, as believers, you and I how we're supposed to live our lives. We're supposed to be servants. We're not supposed to seek to save our lives. For His sake, we're supposed to be willing to lay them down for His purposes. So, but that would be exploited by wicked people who would take advantage of that, who would seize power or more powers. And these are the things that I believe, this is what I'm getting from all this. Again, I'm not so concerned about the virus. I mean, I don't want to get sick, and I don't want to see people around me getting sick. That stinks. And remind me to say something about that in just a moment too. But I'm more concerned, frankly, as to the long-term ramifications of some of the decisions that are being made by government, whether it's state, municipal, and even on the federal level. Right. I heard yesterday that it was fake news, that there was any consideration for any kind of national shutdown. But then I'm hearing things from people who are in certain government posts who are saying the opposite. Who to believe? We're going to have to take it a day at a time. But anyway, those are the kinds of things that are concerning me. So the one other thing I want to say here, and I'm kind of hogging the conversation today, but I'll shut up in just a minute. You remember when we all got sick back in December?
Yep.
During Hanukkah, Beth had said something about it, and I thought about it, and some other folks that were here in the congregation have thought about it, and we're kind of suspicious now that what we experienced might have been what's going on now. And the reason we say that is because how quickly it spread. I mean, would never have I've seen flu spread that fast. I'm not saying it can't happen.
No.
It was just very, very odd. In fact, we were all, just really like, what's going on here? It was so weird. So it kind of makes me wonder if this hasn't been going on in our country even before officially, it's been recognized. So just a sidebar.
Yeah, and they think maybe it started back in, that we had it here in November, maybe a little bit beforehand.
I think
And
so.
yeah, and my husband and I were sick also in December. It was kind of a weird thing that we had a weird, a kind of reaction that we'd never felt before, the way we were feeling, with our symptoms. And so I wondered, gosh, I don't typically get sick. So it was so odd. And it was about, 4 days worth. And then we were okay, the coughing and sneezing, but you just felt different, than like the common flu. So,
Yeah, well, Beth, the reason that we initially didn't suspect it to be the flu is because it was all for Beth and for Allison, it was all respiratory.
yeah.
They got really really sick, and there was one morning I was really scared, frankly.
Hmm.
And so why am I bringing that out? Well, number one, if it was something like that, if it wasn't just the common flu, then I saw how quickly it spread, and so there's on that side, boy, that it really went through our congregation really really fast, and other people
Yeah.
too. On the other side of that, did God allow that to touch our lives to kind of awaken us and alert us to some things that are going on in the world today, and to start, putting plans in place and for our families and for our congregations that, that will know how to respond to these kinds of things without the panic, without the fear setting in, and just like, you know, responding to life. Anyway, just for what it's
No,
worth.
but it's true. But getting back to a little bit about the government, the president just had a press conference right before we went on, and basically, I thought this the other day when I heard it. I didn't like the idea, and I still don't like it. But Romney had said, every adult needs to have $1,000 right now, and does the government just give them $1,000? The president's thinking that he's thinking of all the alternatives. He's looking at that, and he wants to get the money to people right away. And so one of the things that he could possibly do is get a check out to every American right away. Could be $1,000, it could be less, could be more, I don't know. He's also thinking about doing the payroll tax cuts and things of that nature, but he wants to get the money in the hands of people right now. And of course, the Democrats in Congress, they're all for that. I mean, this this the byproduct, if you will, of this coronavirus is a dream come true for those on the left who want to move us closer to socialism and communism. Uh, Andrew Yang, he was running for president. He wanted to put $1,000 a month in everybody's pocket that was an adult. So, I mean, this to me, when I hear my government, and I'm not, I'm not knocking them, because first of all, I'm not going to play Monday morning quarterback on all this, because I'm not in their shoes. I'm also not in the shoes of these people who have been laid off immediately, that desperately need money because of the airlines aren't flying. They're laying people off. The cruise ships are, business is gone. Now they're closing down the restaurants. What are people going to do? My thoughts are, if you get $1,000 and the economy goes bust, that $1,000 is going to be worth zero to you. And so if we keep doing this, if we don't have the money, and everybody keeps saying the economy's great, how long before the economy's not so great?
I'm fundamentally against the idea of the government just giving people money.
Yeah, me too.
You know, I mean, I could make the case, well, we give them money all the time and for a bunch of junk. Well, I agree with that, but I'm fundamentally against the idea of the government just giving people checks, because that reinforces in people's minds, when something goes wrong, I go to
Yeah,
the government,
exactly.
and I'm against that. David said, I will look into the hills from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in this country who look into Capitol Hill, thinking that that's where their help comes from. And this plays into the hands of the socialists, the communists, the Marxists, the godless, the lawless. And so I'm fundamentally against that, and I really hope the president doesn't do that. I realize that there will be people who this situation are going to be suffering, and I really hate that. But here's another problem that I believe that Americans have: we want a quick fix.
Yes.
We want it fixed today. We're a microwave society. We we want
Yeah.
to punch a button and instant gratification. Which, by the way, that's an attribute of a villain in the Bible. By the way, that we've talked about before. His name is Esau. But we want instant gratification. We want a vaccine now. Okay, so they're developing the vaccines, or they're going straight to human, clinical testing.
They did that
Bypassing.
Monday.
Yeah, they're going straight to that because we want a vaccine now. So what?
Yeah.
Okay, so you get a vaccine and you get over this respiratory fever coughing thing, but what have you now subjected your body to long term?
Yeah.
So what if we all get $1,000? Yay, $1,000. Okay, what are the long-term costs going to be? Not just in the economy, but in the mentality that is propagated in this country, that when anything goes wrong, we look to the government. We look to the government to tell us what to do. They're going to give us some money. Well, in exchange for the money, you've got to do this. All these kinds of things. And I'm just fundamentally against that. And I say that knowing that there will be people who will be suffering because of what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, it's funny because I'm reading a lot and doing a lot of research, and there are doctors who are saying that, there's medication that they use for malaria that is showing some promise with coronavirus, but I don't hear anybody saying that we should use that.
I heard that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. But, just going back to this $1,000 thing. Now, here's something that I could get behind. And that is well, no, that's Rand Paul and this other
Yes.
congressman pushing for the IRS to postpone,
Yeah.
filing date for your taxes, because people might
Right.
need that money instead of sending it to the IRS. They might need that money to pay their bills. And so, here's the way I see it. Okay, you keep your $1,000, because you guess where that $1,000 is going to come from? All those taxes that you're going to make me pay by April 15th. So it's not like you're giving me anything. So
Yeah.
I could get behind the idea of, let's ask the IRS to postpone the filing date, and according to Rand Paul, what he's pushing for, and that there would be no penalties, there would be no interest because it's filed late. Now that, to me, I can get behind something like that.
Yeah, and I think Mnuchin, Secretary Mnuchin, talked about that this morning, and I think that's kind of what they're going to. And I don't want to misquote him, but though he's saying those that can file by April 15th should, because they can get money back, and that they will be prolonging for like 90 days, I think it is. Those people who have to pay and can't pay, or those people who can't file and all that. And I'm sure they'll talk more about it because he's going to have a press conference. So the thing of it is about President Trump, he's thought of every avenue. He and all of the people that work for him have thought of just about every avenue about what they should do. So I have to give it to them for that. I know human nature, and I know people after this are going to say, gosh, I liked it when we got $1,000. I wish we got $1,000 a month. Maybe that's not so bad.
Well,
You
exactly.
know, and other things that they're instituting. Well, putting maybe a zero interest on student loans while schools are out and things of that nature. So
or
it's
just free
scary.
education. Let's just go ahead and get free
Exactly.
education. Well, this is what I'm talking about. Here's the way the adversary works. And I'm not saying that everybody in the government has got this satanic, impulse and agenda. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the adversary always works in this way. He hands you something that looks good, and he wants you to take it, but within it, there's a price to be paid. There are consequences of that, and typically it's death. So everything that looks good, all that glitters is not gold, and this is what we as believers need to be conscious of. We need to be aware of, and I don't think we should fall into the trap. And let me say this as well. Going back to the story with Pharaoh and Egypt and the famine, and people end up selling themselves. Guess who did not do that? God's people.
Mm-hmm.
God's people didn't do that.
And it's funny too with talking about the government. Government always has red tape, and we always talk about how long it takes to do something. President Trump was saying today too that we're cutting out all the red tape. Now, Democrats, people on the left, they love red tape because it
Yeah.
takes forever. They're nobody's objecting right now, and people are starting to go do drastic things. San Francisco right now, and the all of California. If you're 65 and older, they're asking you to stay at home. It's not a mandate right now, but they're asking you to stay at home. They've closed the schools, they've closed, the restaurants down, except for drive-throughs and things of that nature. And it just seems to me, again, those people that are giving your food to you in the drive-through, they may have coronavirus. You know what I mean? And it's so you can slow it down, I guess, and that's what they're trying to do, and I commend them for it. But the way we're slowing it seems we need to be cautious about it, and the money that we're throwing out there, we need to be cautious. I think we should be looking more at, let's stop making medications over in China. Let's start today. And I think they are doing this, but let's start today making them here. Let's
Yeah.
never again find ourselves in this position.
Well, and on that topic, then this plays into Trump's hand. What's going on?
Exactly. Yeah.
Things that he's been pushing for, and I believe we should have been pushing for, and to secure the borders, not just for people coming across the southern border, but when we have things like these kinds of infectious diseases. The cynical Bill would think that the Chinese government, they don't care anything about their people. They don't care if they're sick. Yeah, let them go to the United States. That's that serves our purposes. I mean, that's how I, think about the communist mindset. But also the idea that, China is our greatest threat. And wow, here we have something, that is, people are all freaked out about. Of course, they don't want Trump calling it the China flu or the China virus or whatever, even though it's
what it
come
is,
from.
the truth. Yeah.
But anyway, in the sense that we need to get more of these products manufactured, produced here in the United States, I mean, that plays into his hand. And so this is kind of, a launching pad to make that argument even stronger. And I would hope that people would see the common sense in that, not the political sense, but the common sense in that.
Or the value of homeschool, going to school online, little things like that,
our common acquaintance, Billy Hollowell, I saw him tweeting this morning that, we've been talking about homeschool, but guess what? Now we're kind of forced into doing it. There are, I guess you could say, there can be a silver lining in some of this if we don't revert back to our same old way of thinking once this particular wave has kind of leveled out.
And unfortunately, we tend to do that in this society. After 9/11, we were willing to also give up a lot of our freedoms because of 9/11. And let's hope we don't do that same thing now, or make it where everybody is, okay, you have to take this vaccine. We're going to demand that you do that because we're not going to ever allow ourselves to be in this position again. I don't want the vaccine, just to go on record, because
I
don't
take
want
the vaccine.
Yeah, well, unless they hold you down. I mean, hopefully it won't come to that point. But I don't know if Brandon has this. Let's look at video 1 and what's going. Now, this is not California. This is Kentucky. I want everybody to know that. Let's roll that tape on video 1 in Kentucky. That's, let's see if we can get that up.
We have had the first instance of an individual who has refused to self-isolate, and we have taken the steps to force a isolation that will be in their home. This is a Nelson County resident that has tested positive, left against medical advice, refused to self-quarantine. We have worked with the county judges and others. It's a step I hope that I never had to take, but we can't allow one person who we know has this virus to refuse to protect their neighbors.
that guy's got a D behind his name. Just saying.
Yeah, he does. And he also has a P for progressive behind his name as well. Yeah, I was telling somebody, I thought California had the most left-wing governor and with the craziest ideas. And after I saw this governor in Kentucky speak yesterday, I take that back.
Yeah.
California is not the craziest place.
Well, I want to kind of look at this from both sides. It just, I hate the idea of government telling people how they can and cannot live their life. Now, on the other side of that, this person who, if he's tested positive, should be considerate of those that he comes in contact
Should be,
with.
absolutely
He should be considerate and say, hey, look, I'm sick. I'm going to keep my distance, that. But forcing somebody to stay in their house and not leave their house, there's part of me that just bows up against that.
Right.
And
they have police outside of his door. He's not going out.
Yeah, that to me is that seems a good bit overboard. But people who have that kind of a mindset, talking about the governor now, who have that kind of a mindset, they wouldn't hesitate to use force to push their agenda, always under the guise of we're looking out for you.
Right.
It's always that way. Now,
well,
I'm sorry. Let me just say this one quick thing again. I just want to make sure that people heard me say the man who's sick should be considerate of everybody that's around him. Should, not try to be out in public any more than he has to be, But if he lives alone, maybe he's got to go to the grocery store. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and then what about millennials? They're saying, stop going to the bars, millennials, because you're infecting people. Should we stop people from going to the bars? Now they're closing the bars and so they can't go, but, and people on spring break, they're going to the beach and that's frowned upon too. Again, and I understand the absolute fear and panic that's going on. I get it. I just don't know if we're going to the extremes. We're not China. We're not Italy. And I know people say, well, yeah, but we don't want to become that. We don't have the same kind of issues. Now, we've also had Cuomo going on today, talking about, wow, we only have 53,000 beds in the hospital. And this could go, we could need, I think he said 50 to 200,000 or 100 and some thousand beds. He may have said 200,000. I can't remember the numbers now. And when, no, 110,000. That's what he said. And when you hear that, that's going to make you panic. Whether that ever gets to 110,000, let's hope not. But why do you need to come out in public and say that? And now he's talking about, well, we want to double up more in the hospital and all that. Isn't that what caused Wuhan, China, probably to be worse because they had people laying out in the hallway? They had so many people confined in one space.
Fear and panic pushes the agenda of the progressives and the liberals and the Marxists and the communists and things like that. And, in a practical sense, maybe instead of giving all that money to Planned Parenthood, maybe you should have built some more hospitals.
Yeah.
Things like that are what come to my mind.
And the abortion clinics haven't closed down. So I'm just saying.
Right. Well, these are the kinds of things that I was talking about earlier. It's not so much the virus, even though I don't want to get the virus. I don't want to get sick. I don't want my family to get sick. I've got a pregnant daughter-in-law. I got a grandbaby coming. I don't want people getting sick. I'm not, I'm not being cynical in that regard, and I'm not downplaying that part of it. It's just that when you have something like this, you've got the governors of Kentucky who are very, very, very liberal and progressive in their mindset, who are going. They don't consider anything wrong with doing that, even though it shows, I believe it kind of shows where they would take this if there really was an epidemic that is sweeping across the country that is killing tens of thousands. What would they do then? Anyway,
did y'all hear about the governor in Illinois? I think it was Champaign.
Yeah,
Champaign put out a municipal order.
Yeah.
Or the mayor, whatever.
Yeah. We had mentioned that earlier.
But she said, don't worry, we're not going to do any of those things. We just have the power to do them if it comes to. But talking about people who, let's say, they don't practice what they preach, right? They tell others to do things, but they themselves don't do it. Let's look at the photograph number one. This is Bill de Blasio. And this is him in his, government official car with his NYPD detail. yesterday, after 27,000 restaurants were due to close down, people are sick in New York. There are a lot of people in New York that are infected and confirmed with coronavirus, and we're going to close down the city and all that. The mayor decides, I'm going to go to the gym. He actually went to the gym yesterday, worked out for an hour before it closed down. And he couldn't understand why people were so upset with him going to the gym. It's like, well, I just went to the gym. What's the big problem? Well, you just stood there, and for the last couple of days talking about nationalizing private companies and wanting the president to nationalize private companies and to do a takeover. And you've talked about how bad this, pandemic is. And then you go to the gym and maybe spread whatever germs that you have on the people that you've just said, don't go to the gym, don't go to the restaurant, don't go anywhere. Well, so it's this,
once
Marie
again,
Antoinette comes to mind.
Once again, some people are more equal than others.
Yes. And see, that's it's what we've been talking about. That's the problem. Do what I say, not what I do. That's what we want you to do, because we know what's best for you, Bill. And you don't know what's best for you or anybody else. So we're going to tell you what's best for you. And what you need to do is stay home and don't go out. That's scary.
And looking at this, seeing this from the perspective of someone who now finds himself in a situation where they got a pastor or a group of people. Mm-hmm. And, this is congregational life is all about coming together and worshiping and fellowshipping and those kinds of things, and being encouraged by one another, helping one another. This could, down the road somewhere, I don't know that it's in this particular case, but this down the road is a way that the adversary could manipulate to keep God's people from being able to do that.
Absolutely.
To divide and conquer, that kind of a mentality. And so that's something else I'm looking at this, is that I'm not saying it is being used that way. I'm saying it could be used that way. And given time, I think it would be used that way. Under the guise of, we need to protect the public, you guys can't meet together. I mean, the CDC is already recommending, I think the wording was strongly encouraging people to not go to any kind of a meeting where there's more than 10 people. Yeah. I mean, what does that do for churches and synagogues? And, what does that do for them?
Closes you down.
Pretty much. Exactly. Pretty much. They were saying, well, instead live stream. Well, as a congregation that does live stream, I definitely see the benefit of that for those, for the folks who can't go anywhere. But I can tell you that it's not just as simple as flipping on a switch and all of a sudden you can live stream to all these different people,
as we know in this show.
Right. There's a lot more to it, and a lot more expense. And some congregations just can't do that. So what does that do to God's people? And so this is, again, going back to what I said at the very beginning. It's not so much the virus that's worrisome to me. It's how people could use situations like this to exploit it and to manipulate, to coerce, and even shut down, congregations and churches and things like that. I think it was in South Korea. I might be wrong there, but I think it was in South Korea that there was a pastor of a congregation there that's going to prison because he is being blamed for allowing people to come to the church and everything, and then propagate this sickness. Now, and I may have the country wrong, but I think it was South Korea. But things like that, well, that would never happen in the United States. Don't count on it.
Well, and I don't think we need to apologize. And we're not being conspiracy theorists, but God gave us a mind and discernment to think about these things and to think about what might be happening that we're not being told, or it's not exactly the way it appears. You look at this too, and so I'm going to go out on a limb here because everybody's going to think that I'm a conspiracy theorist or whatever.
You got your tinfoil hat?
Got my tinfoil hat on. But when you think about this and you think about the time when the Antichrist is to come upon the scene, man, what better way to do it than through a pandemic, getting people panic, chaos. So people will say, "Oh my gosh, can we just find somebody who's going to handle all of this and who's going to lead us out of this? We need somebody." And people will be willing to go forward. I'm not saying that this is the case or this is the time. I'm saying it makes you think about the Bible. When the Bible says some of these things are happening, when I used to sit there and go, "Now, how would that ever happen?"
Yeah.
You're just like, "Oh, that it's so far fetched." It's not so far fetched anymore. It really isn't.
Well, it isn't, and that's why I said earlier that scared people are what scare me.
Yes.
Because it's of what they're willing to do, if to save their life. So that's the bothersome thing. But now I also want to say that, as believers, we can't give into the fear, we can't give into the panic.
Right.
We just need to learn to evaluate and assess what's going on here. Look at our own lives, how we respond to certain things, in the ways that we're not responding biblically. We need to address that. We need to overcome that, and we need to consider for the future, in that we've been placed here for a reason, and that is to be a light in the midst of the darkness and not to be sucked into the darkness of these things. So whatever that means to you as an individual, that's what you need to address right now going forward, because there's going to be another test coming down the road.
Oh,
And there'll be another wave behind that that'll be even bigger until the tsunami hits. And we've got to be prepared for those kinds of things to do what we were placed here to do.
Well, and I want to say too, since I have my tinfoil hat on, I'll just keep it on for a second. But you think about this too in Ezekiel 38 and 39. When you think about, well, why would the United States not be in a position to come and help Israel? Man, you're talking about a position right now that we're in. Yes, we would go help them now. We're not in that position, but you could see a scenario where something like this might happen, and
I think she just froze up there. There she is.
Oh, okay.
You froze up for just a second.
Okay. So that the government wouldn't be working well, or that it wouldn't be running well, or whatever, so that we could go and help Israel at that time. So what I'm saying is there are scenarios that in the past we would have looked at and go, I don't even know. There's nothing going to happen like that. We haven't seen anything like that. We're starting to see things like that,
Well, think about this, and we're pointing out all the problems. We need to, before we end today, we need to address the solutions. But, what this is also doing is, not that weren't aware of this before, but it's just, again, accentuating the great divide that is in this country. And, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so that plays into what you were just mentioning as it relates to some of these other things biblically. So, all of these things are kind of like right here in your face. Take a look.
Yes.
This is where America's at. This is what's going on in America. This is the mentality that seems to be pretty, pervasive among the masses. And as God's people, we can't get sucked into that way of thinking.
Yeah. Now, Linda Smith said, God is teaching us now. And Robin said, before, she was talking about, we do depend on God. And then Mama Sim said, until they pull the live stream plug, because they don't like what you're saying, or, shut down the satellites, the Wi-Fi, the this and the that. I mean, there's a lot of power in that one in Illinois. She does have the power now under that executive order to start doing things like that, like turning off electricity if she wants to. Not saying she will, but she's got the power.
Yeah. I mean, there's all those kinds of things. And so, knowing that those kinds of things could happen, and seeing how we are dependent on this and that and the other, that's what I'm saying. We need to evaluate, okay, as a father and a husband, what do I need to do to take care of my family? As at this point, as a pastor or congregational leader, whatever the word you want to use is, what are my responsibilities now as a congregational leader for those people who are under my care? What do I need to do? What do I, and what do I need to share with them that they need to do? Those are the things that we should be evaluating when we see something like this. All of us get lulled into the routine of life, and we go about our business. I do, and I get upset about that this doesn't work just right, and this isn't happening when I think it should happen, and all that kind of stuff. And then you have things like this that come up, and it reminds you, overnight, the world can change. Everybody's life can change
in a split second.
Right. And are you prepared to continue on being who you're supposed to be in God's eyes and what He's called you to be if everything changes overnight. And I think what we will find is that most of us, no, we're not. Now's the time to evaluate those things so that the next time this happens, and it will happen again, we're better prepared to continue on and not be sucked into all the panic.
No, absolutely. And speaking about how we're handling it, let's look at Israel, how Israel is handling it. They approved on Sundays a series of emergency regulations to deal with the outbreak. And one of the things that they're doing is that people that they have told that they need to, stay at home or be quarantined, they're fining those people about over $1,000, about $1,300, as a matter of fact, if they leave their house, leave their quarantine. So, there are other countries that are taking things, to maybe a little bit more extreme than we would do in the United States. But, maybe we're not there yet either.
Okay, well, let's think about that for a moment. Let's say that there was a national quarantine. Mm-hmm. If things change today and the president comes out tomorrow morning and declares that there's a national quarantine for the next 2 weeks to 1 month, what would you do? Are you ready?
Have no sound. No, there.
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Okay, how about now?
Now I can.
Yeah, so it turns out I was right.
Yeah.
About something earlier that I was told I wasn't. Anyway.
See, they've pulled the plug on you already, Bill.
All right, well, I'm going to have to hold this. What would you do if they come out and said there's a national, shutdown? And I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying, what would you do? Are you ready for that? I think it's common sense, for people to have the basic necessities of life on hand, just in case something like this happens, an earthquake where you're at, a tornado where I'm at, any number of those things. We get lulled to sleep because, we're so accustomed to everything being right at our fingertips as Americans. And so again, we could use this as a lesson as to why we don't need to assume that everything is going to be just like it always has been, especially if you believe what the Bible has to say about the future. So it's just another reminder to be practical as well. There's a proverb that says, "Hi, what am I doing? Why'd you take your mic off?" Because it wasn't working. I took my mic because it wasn't working. That's why. All right, now I guess it's back on now.
Now I can hear you.
Okay,
yes,
you can hear me. There's a proverb that says, and I'm going to paraphrase it, the ant is smart enough to realize that in the summertime, he should store up things because the winter is coming. All right? Mm-hmm. But why does the ant do that? So that in the wintertime, he can continue being an ant. Mm-hmm. As God's people, we're here to be salt and light. So if we know that winter is coming, if we know the Bible has said there's going to be a time when things aren't going to work the way they've always worked, there's going to be a time of lack, and there's going to be a time of trial and tribulation and this, that, and the other. While it's summertime, what should we be doing? Well, we need to not panic, freak out, hoard, and I'm not saying be a doomsday prepper, but we do need to do practical things. Why? So that we can continue being salt and light, not to survive. We're not called to be survivors. We're called to be overcomers. So there has to be balance. There has to be wisdom employed here.
Right. Well, here's what I've learned, that I'm going to go out and buy stock in toilet paper because obviously, every emergency needs about 5 carloads of toilet paper.
Okay. Well, I have a quick question. What is the toilet paper thing about? Do you know?
I just think that people thought, that if they're quarantined in their home for forever, I suppose, they need all this toilet paper. And there's a run on bidets and toilet paper and Kleenex and napkins and paper towels. I mean, literally, I don't know about what Tennessee's like, but for weeks now, we haven't been able to find any toilet paper in California. And if it comes out on a pallet, it's gone before they can put it on the shelf. So, it's.
Well, then, if that's the case, I'm not going to ask you what you've been doing, but
We have toilet paper. We always buy toilet paper. I don't know if people let it run out and they have to go when there's an emergency. So but again, you look at all of this too. Were people not practicing proper hygiene? I mean, were people ever washing their hands? It makes you wonder, what was going on with all these people.
yeah, I saw something the other day. It was that, I'm, I'm going to wash my hands more than ever before, because apparently before now, nobody was actually using toilet paper.
Like,
So,
it's like soap and water. What's that? And
yeah.
so, to see all of this, I mean, I do hope that people are learning more and preparing more. And again, and it's a shame that we have to say this, but I'll say it for the both of us. We're not making light of the coronavirus.
No, we're
We
not.
we know it is serious and it should be looked at seriously. The question is, are we just overdoing it? Because we are, as a people, we are sometimes prone to panic, and those people who are not believers and don't have God in their lives, they are really running around as if that it is the end of the world, because they have nobody, no, they don't have God to focus on, and where they get their power and their strength.
They have no anchor. They have no hope.
They have nothing,
So
right?
they're kind of listless in that regard. But we're not downplaying the severity of the coronavirus. I'm not certain that some of the doomsday figures that some people have thrown out there are going to be realized. I kind of think that it won't be anywhere near that. I hope that's correct. But what we are pointing out, and this is the way I look at it, Susan, the illusionist, he wants you looking at this hand.
Yes.
He wants you to see the flowers or the handkerchief or whatever flashy thing he's holding over here. And the reason he wants you looking over here is because he doesn't want you looking over here. And that's what I'm looking at here. While this is all happening here, what's going on? Well, you've got these situations that are popping up all over the country where people in power are exploiting this, I believe, not for what they say in the best interest of the people, but in the best interest of those who want to hold power.
Yeah. And now Ruth said she needs to have the toilet paper for blowing her nose. And she said when she's sick, she uses an excessive amount of toilet paper. So that, there are people like Rue who needs to, get truckloads of toilet paper. I don't think she's really meaning that, but that's why people were doing it, I think, because they were just panicked over that. I think, one of the things I think is funny too, that we've been wanting to build this wall, and everybody's like, no, and Mexico's like, no, you don't build that wall and keep our people out. That's horrible. And now Mexico is saying, you know what, we're kind of thinking about maybe we want to kind of keep you Americans out of Mexico for the time being, because we don't have any coronavirus and we don't want you here. I think that's, hilarious in a weird kind of happening way,
Who knows? Maybe some good things will come out of this.
Well,
I hope so.
ISIS is not doing anything. ISIS is shut down. Seriously, because of the coronavirus.
Yeah,
ISIS.
I heard that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some really silver linings in all of this. I also think one of the silver linings, I think that President Trump, and as you alluded to before, I mean, can you imagine anybody else but President Trump at this time handling this problem? For me, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If Bernie or Biden wouldn't remember there was a coronavirus going around. And I'm not saying, there is something wrong, absolutely wrong with him. And I'm not making light of that. But there's nobody else capable right now who's in line to be president, even, that could handle the situation even half as well as Donald Trump.
Well, I like the fact that this is my impression anyway, I like the fact that he has some professionals around him, and he's kind of letting them do their job and listening to their recommendations and going with that. I'm sure that there are other people whispering recommendations into his ear that I hope he doesn't go along with, like giving everybody $1,000, those kinds of things. I'm just glad that those who aren't prone to want more power, I'm just glad they're not in the position of power right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I think, as the president said, we may be looking at several months, before we really see a turnaround on this. And if people could just wash your hands, don't touch your face and other, places, your eyes, your ears, and all of that. Stay away from people when you're sick. Stay away from people when they're sick. Do the best you can. And I think it's so important to stress to people that potentially those who aren't 65 and older with health issues and compromised immune systems at a younger age and on, most of those people are recovering. A lot of people are recovering now, even in China. So it every time I hear it on the media, it makes it sound like if you get it, you're dead. And that's
Yeah.
not
No,
the truth.
no, it's not. Um, it won't be fun. It stinks. I'm sure. I mean, I had the flu one time in my whole life, and that rots.
Yeah.
And then I saw what Beth and Allison and others went through, and it wasn't fun, but they recovered and they're fine now. So it's not an end of the world scenario. Okay.
Right. It's being pushed that way, though, a little bit.
Yeah, it's being pushed that way by some, I think,
Yeah.
or that millions of people are going to die. I heard that the other day, and that hasn't happened. Obviously we're not through with this thing yet, but it hasn't happened. But anyway, I don't have the promise I'm going to wake up in the morning. I could go to bed tonight and just not wake up. Life is that fragile. Which then brings us back to what's the most important things in life. Those things that have eternal value, to serve God, to serve others. What does the Lord require of you, oh man, that you do justly, you love mercy, and you walk humbly before your God. Those are things that have eternal value. We love God, we love one another as ourselves, and we do, and we serve, and those are the things, Susan, that I'm simplistic enough in my faith to believe that will make the difference between life and death. When there is a plague, when there are things sweeping over a nation or a town, or a state, it's going to be those that have placed their confidence and trust in God, who are His and that are walking upright before Him. That will be Psalm 91. Comes to mind. The 1,000 may fall at one hand and 10,000 the other, but doesn't come near you. Why? Because you've made Him your refuge. And that isn't to say that God's people don't get sick, because we know they do. It's just to say that in the midst of all this crisis and plague and panic and fear, if we're doing what's right before Him, then we have the promise that He watches over us and He keeps us and He protects us. And if we get sick, He heals us.
Yeah. And I think that's what we, have to remember. Just take a deep breath, have your focus on God and not the mainstream media or anybody else. Stay focused, put on the full armor of God, pray for our country, the president, pray for people who are, who have the coronavirus, pray for their healing. And you know what? We should be doing that all the time anyway.
Right.
So, this is teaching me, and I think it's teaching a lot of, excuse me, other people, as you said. Sorry, it wasn't the coronavirus. I hope I'm just coughing. And so, but teaching other people that, these are things we should be doing all along. And it doesn't, as Christians especially, it shouldn't take a pandemic to have us do what we know God wants us to do. And, so.
No, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
but we're human.
Being human,
right.
we need these reminders,
Yeah. And God is drawing us closer, and God will use whatever to draw all of us closer. And this is a good time, for people who aren't, who are Christians, who come in contact with non-believers, to start talking to them about God and the importance of being, of eternal salvation. So, another opportunity.
Something that occurred to me the other day, and I'm sure I was not the only one who saw this. Mm-hmm. But, corona, I think that's the Spanish word for crown. Mm-hmm. And, so a lot of people are fearful of this virus whose name it means a crown. It's almost like they're, they fear this more than they fear God.
Right.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so, we need to take the crown off of the virus, and we need to put it back on where it needs to be,
Exactly.
We have a king, we have a sovereign creator he is Lord over all, and that includes every virus, every plague, every sickness, every fear, and we need to get our focus back there and just decrown. I think that's the way one lady put it to me. We need to decrown, this coronavirus, and we need to get our focus back on the one who wears the crown that says King of Kings. So I think it's very important for us to kind of keep everything in perspective here.
Yep. No, absolutely. And we are out of time. We just that hour flew by. So for everybody out there, stay safe, take care of yourself, take care of others, and pray to God, as we've been talking about, and just live your life. And we as Christians, we know where we are going, and that's what you have to keep your focus on. God is in control. We're not. So until next week, God bless you. Take care. We'll see you again then.
All right. Bye-bye.